The morning sun cast long shadows across Melrose Avenue as Keanu Reeves stepped out of his modest Honda Civic, the same car he'd been driving for years despite his Hollywood success. At 59, he moved with a quiet grace that belied the action hero persona millions knew him for. His dark hair, now streaked with silver, caught the early light as he walked toward his favorite coffee shop, a small, unassuming place tucked between a vintage bookstore and a plant nursery. This had become his ritual over the past 18 months. The same route, the same time, the same gentle nod to the shopkeepers who recognized him but respected his privacy. Los Angeles could be an unforgiving place for celebrities, but this little corner of the city felt different. Here, people seemed to understand that fame didn't erase the need for normalcy, for quiet moments and simple pleasures. As he approached the intersection of Melrose and Fairfax, Keanu's eyes instinctively turned toward the second-floor window of the brick apartment building across the street. There she was, just as she had been every morning for the past year and a half, a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, with wild curly hair and an infectious smile that could brighten even the gloomiest Los Angeles morning. She spotted him immediately, as she always did, and her small hand pressed against the glass before she began waving enthusiastically. Her entire face lit up with joy, and Keanu couldn't help but smile in return, raising his own hand in a gentle wave back to her. It was a simple exchange, lasting no more than a few seconds, but it had become the highlight of his morning routine. He had no idea who she was, had never met her or her family, but their wordless friendship had developed organically. Some days she would hold up drawings she'd made, pressing them against the window for him to see. Other days she would simply wave, sometimes jumping up and down with excitement. Once she had spelled out "Hi Keanu" in what looked like colorful magnets arranged on the glass, and he had laughed out loud, giving her an exaggerated bow that sent her into fits of giggles he could see even from the street below. The girl's enthusiasm was infectious, and Keanu found himself looking forward to their brief encounters more than he cared to admit. In a life filled with scripts to read, meetings to attend, and the constant pressure of public scrutiny, these moments of pure, uncomplicated joy had become precious to him. There was something beautiful about her unwavering consistency, her genuine happiness at seeing him that asked for nothing in return. Today, as always, he waved back, noting how she seemed to bounce on her toes with excitement. She held up what appeared to be a new drawing. He could make out bright colors, and what might have been a stick figure, though the details were lost at this distance. He gave her a thumbs up and touched his heart, a gesture that made her beam even brighter before pressing both palms against the window. As he continued toward the coffee shop, Keanu found himself wondering about her story. Was she homeschooled? Was that why she was always at the window during school hours? Did her parents know about their daily exchange? He had considered trying to find out more, perhaps asking around the neighborhood, but something held him back. There was a purity to their interaction that felt almost sacred. Two souls acknowledging each other across the chaos of city life. No words needed, no complications. The coffee shop owner, Maria, greeted him with her usual warm smile. She was a woman in her 60s who had emigrated from El Salvador 30 years ago and built this little sanctuary, one espresso at a time. Her English was accented but confident, and she had never once asked Keanu for a selfie or made him feel like anything other than a regular customer. "The usual?" she asked, already reaching for a medium-sized cup. "Please," Keanu replied, settling into his customary seat by the window. From here, he could see the girl's apartment building, though the angle was wrong to spot her window. "And maybe one of those chocolate croissants. They smell incredible." Maria beamed. "My daughter made them fresh this morning. She's visiting from San Diego with my granddaughter." Her expression softened. "You know, you remind me of my late husband sometimes. He had the same kind eyes, the same way of really listening when people spoke." Keanu felt a familiar warmth at the comparison. He had learned over the years that the most meaningful compliments often came from unexpected places, from people who saw beyond the Hollywood facade to something more essential. "That's very kind of you to say, Maria. He sounds like he was a good man." "The best," she said simply, setting his coffee and pastry down with careful attention. "He would have liked you, I think. He always said you could tell a person's character by how they treat people who can't do anything for them." As Keanu sipped his coffee and watched the street come alive with morning activity, he thought about Maria's words. The entertainment industry was full of people who were charming to those who could advance their careers and dismissive of everyone else. He had seen it countless times, had been guilty of it himself in his younger years, before life taught him harder lessons about what really mattered. The girl across the street had no idea who he was. He was certain of that. To her, he was simply a nice man who walked by her window every morning and took a moment to acknowledge her existence. There was something profound in that simplicity, something that reminded him why he had fallen in love with acting in the first place. The ability to connect with strangers, to share a moment of humanity across whatever barriers might exist. His phone buzzed with a text from his assistant about a script reading later that morning, followed by a lunch meeting with his agent, then a photo shoot for a magazine cover. The day ahead was mapped out in 15-minute increments, each appointment building toward projects that would eventually reach millions of people around the world. But sitting here in Maria's coffee shop, thinking about a little girl who waved from her window, Keanu was reminded that sometimes the most important connections happened in the smallest moments. He finished his coffee and croissant, left a generous tip for Maria, and headed back out into the morning sun. The walk to his car took him past the apartment building again, and he glanced up automatically, expecting to see the girl's familiar face. But the window was empty, the curtains drawn. It was unusual but not unprecedented. There had been a few mornings over the past 18 months when she hadn't appeared. Maybe her family was traveling, or perhaps she was simply sleeping in. The next morning brought the same routine. The drive down Melrose, the parking space in front of the coffee shop, the automatic glance toward the second-floor window. Again, it was empty. Keanu felt a small pang of disappointment but pushed it aside. Children had schedules that adults couldn't always understand, obligations and activities that disrupted even the most established routines. By the third morning, however, a different feeling had settled in his chest. Not quite worry, but a heightened awareness that something might be amiss. The girl had never missed 3 consecutive days before. Her consistency had been one of the things that made their daily exchange so special. Rain or shine, weekday or weekend, she had been there with her boundless enthusiasm and radiant smile. Keanu found himself walking more slowly past the building, lingering longer than usual as he studied the windows. The apartment was definitely occupied. He could see the faint glow of lights inside, the suggestion of movement behind the curtains. But no small face appeared, no eager hand pressed against the glass. Inside the coffee shop, Maria noticed his distraction immediately. "You seem troubled today, my friend. Is everything all right?" Keanu hesitated, unsure how to explain his concern without sounding foolish. "There's a little girl who lives across the street," he began carefully. "She usually waves from her window when I walk by. I haven't seen her in a few days, and I suppose I'm wondering if she's okay." Maria's expression grew thoughtful. "Ah, yes, I know the one you mean. Lily Chen. Such a sweet child, always so cheerful when she comes in with her grandmother." She paused, and something flickered across her face. "Actually, now that you mention it, I haven't seen her either lately. Her grandmother usually brings her by for hot chocolate on Saturdays, but she didn't come this past weekend." The fact that Maria knew the girl's name and routine made Keanu feel simultaneously relieved and more concerned. At least she was a real presence in the neighborhood, not just someone passing through. But if even Maria had noticed her absence, it suggested that whatever was keeping Lily from her window might be more serious than a simple change in schedule. "Do you know anything about her family?" Keanu asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "She lives with her grandmother, Mrs. Chen. Lovely woman, came here from Taiwan many years ago. Lily's parents." Maria lowered her voice. "There was an accident when she was very young. Her grandmother has raised her since then. They're very close, those two." Keanu felt his chest tighten. A child who had already lost so much being raised by an elderly grandmother, it painted a picture that made his concern feel more justified. Is Mrs. Chen in good health? She has diabetes, manages it well most of the time. But at her age, Maria shrugged with the resigned wisdom of someone who had seen too many friends and relatives struggle with aging bodies. She's in her 70s, works very hard to take care of that little one. That afternoon, Keanu found himself unable to concentrate during his script reading. The story they were discussing, a thriller about a man searching for his missing daughter, felt uncomfortably relevant to his growing worry about Lily. When one of the other actors made a joke about helicopter parenting, Keanu's mind wandered to an elderly woman trying to care for an energetic child, possibly alone, possibly struggling with health issues. During a break, he stepped outside and called his assistant. "Sarah, I need you to help me with something, but I want to be very discreet about it. There's a family in my neighborhood, a grandmother and her granddaughter. I'm concerned about their welfare, but I don't want to seem intrusive or create any kind of scene." Sarah had worked with Keanu for 8 years and had learned to navigate his occasional impulses toward anonymous generosity. "What do you need me to do?" "Can you find out if there's been any recent activity at the local hospitals? Specifically, if an elderly Asian woman named Mrs. Chen or a young girl named Lily Chen have been admitted? And maybe check with social services, see if there have been any reports or calls for assistance at their address." "I'll make some calls," Sarah said. "Can I ask what's prompting this?" Keanu looked back toward the building where they were holding the script reading, then out at the busy street beyond. How to explain that a child's absence from a window had triggered every protective instinct he possessed? "Sometimes you just know when something's not right," he said finally. "I'd rather feel foolish for caring too much than regret not caring enough." 2 hours later, Sarah called back with news that made Keanu's stomach drop. Mrs. Chen had been admitted to Cedars-Sinai 3 days ago with complications from her diabetes. She was stable, but would likely be hospitalized for at least another week. There was no record of what had happened to Lily, no indication that social services had been notified or that any family members had been contacted to care for the child. Keanu canceled his remaining meetings for the day and drove straight to the hospital. The process of getting information without being either family or an official guardian proved challenging, but his celebrity status, wielded carefully and humbly, eventually opened doors. A social worker named Janet Rodriguez agreed to meet with him in the hospital lobby. "I understand you're concerned about the Chen family," she said, settling into a chair across from him with a thick folder in her hands. "May I ask about your relationship to them?" Keanu chose his words carefully. "I live in the neighborhood. The little girl, Lily, she waves to me from her window every morning when I walk by. I've noticed she hasn't been there lately, and when I inquired at the local coffee shop, the owner mentioned that Mrs. Chen was usually very consistent with their routines. I was worried that something might have happened." Janet studied him with the careful attention of someone accustomed to evaluating people's motivations. "Mrs. Chen was brought in by ambulance Monday evening. Her blood sugar had dropped dangerously low, and she was unconscious when the paramedics arrived. A neighbor heard Lily crying and called 911. "Where is Lily now?" Keanu asked, though he dreaded the answer. "That's complicated," Janet admitted. "Mrs. Chen regained consciousness Tuesday morning, but she's been in and out since then. When she's lucid, she's extremely worried about Lily, but she hasn't been able to provide us with any information about other family members or emergency contacts. The child is currently staying at a temporary foster placement, but she's not adjusting well. She keeps asking when her grandmother is coming home and why she can't visit the hospital." Keanu felt a familiar ache in his chest, the same one he experienced whenever he encountered children caught in circumstances beyond their control. What happens if Mrs. Chen recovers fully? Will they be reunited? Assuming Mrs. Chen is able to return to independent living, yes, but that could take weeks, possibly months. At her age, with her condition, there's also the possibility that she may not be able to resume full-time care of a child. We're trying to locate any relatives, but Mrs. Chen's records indicate she emigrated here alone decades ago. Lily's parents died in a car accident when she was 3, and there don't seem to be any other family members in the United States. The weight of the situation settled over Keanu like a heavy blanket. Here was a child who had already lost her parents, now facing the possibility of losing the only family she had left. And somewhere in the system, she was staying with strangers, unable to understand why her world had suddenly been turned upside down. "Can I see Mrs. Chen?" he asked. "I'd like to let her know that people in the neighborhood are concerned about her and Lily." Janet hesitated. She's not supposed to have visitors outside of immediate family, but she glanced at his face, seeming to weigh something. "Room 314. She's been awake more today than yesterday. Just don't stay too long, and if any of the medical staff ask, you're a family friend." Mrs. Chen looked smaller than Keanu had expected, dwarfed by the hospital bed and the array of monitors surrounding her. Her gray hair was pulled back neatly, and despite her illness, there was something dignified about her bearing. When she saw him enter, her eyes widened with confusion. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Keanu said gently, pulling a chair closer to her bedside. "My name is Keanu. I live in your neighborhood, and I wanted to check on you and Lily." Recognition flickered across her features. "You're the man who waves to Lily," she said, her voice weak but clear. "She talks about you all the time. She calls you the nice man with the kind eyes." Keanu felt his throat tighten. "She brightens my whole day with those waves. I noticed she hadn't been at the window lately, and I was worried something might be wrong." Tears began to flow down Mrs. Chen's cheeks. "I failed her," she whispered. "I promised her parents I would take care of her, and I failed. She must be so scared, so confused. They won't let her visit me here, and I don't know how to explain to her what's happening." "You didn't fail anyone," Keanu said firmly. "You got sick. That's not your fault, and it's not anyone's fault. The important thing now is that you get better so you can go home to Lily." "But what if I can't?" Mrs. Chen's voice broke. "What if I'm too sick, too old? What happens to her then? She's lost so much already. I can't bear the thought of her losing me too." Keanu reached out and gently took her hand. "Let's focus on getting you well first. As for Lily, she's not alone. The whole neighborhood cares about both of you. Maria at the coffee shop has been asking about you, and I'm sure there are others who would want to help if they knew what was happening." Mrs. Chen squeezed his hand with surprising strength. Could you possibly see her? She doesn't know anyone in the foster home, and she must be so frightened. If she could see a familiar face, someone from home." "Of course," Keanu said without hesitation. "I'll do whatever I can to help." The next morning, instead of his usual walk to the coffee shop, Keanu found himself driving to a suburban house in Burbank, where Lily was staying with a foster family. Janet had arranged the visit, though she had warned him that Lily had been withdrawn and tearful since her placement. The foster mother, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman in her 50s who had been caring for children in crisis for more than 2 decades. She led Keanu to the backyard where Lily sat alone on a swing set, moving slowly back and forth with her head down. "Lily?" Mrs. Patterson called gently. "There's someone here to see you." The little girl looked up, and Keanu saw that her usually bright eyes were red with tears and shadowed with confusion. But when she recognized him, her entire face transformed. She leaped off the swing and ran toward him with the same enthusiasm she had shown from her window, throwing her arms around his waist and holding on as if he might disappear. "You came," she said, her voice muffled against his jacket. "I thought everyone forgot about me." Keanu knelt down so he was at her eye level, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "Nobody forgot about you, Lily. Your grandmother is in the hospital getting better, and she asked me to come see you because she misses you so much." "When can I go home?" Lily asked, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't understand why I can't see Grandma, why I have to stay here with strangers. Did I do something wrong?" "You didn't do anything wrong," Keanu assured her. "Sometimes grown-ups get sick and need doctors to help them get better. Your grandmother is getting the best care possible, and as soon as she's well enough, you'll be together again. But what if she doesn't get better? What if she dies like Mommy and Daddy?" The fear in Lily's voice was heartbreaking. Keanu pulled her into a gentle hug, feeling the weight of her small body shaking with sobs. "I can't promise you that nothing bad will ever happen," he said carefully. "But I can promise you that you're not alone. There are people who care about you and want to make sure you're safe and loved, no matter what. Over the next hour, they talked about her grandmother, her school, her drawings, and her favorite books. Gradually, Lily's natural exuberance began to resurface. She showed him a picture she had drawn of her apartment building, complete with a small figure in the window waving at another figure on the street below. "That's you," she said, pointing to the street figure. "And that's me waving. I drew it so I wouldn't forget." "I could never forget our morning waves," Keanu told her. "They're the best part of my day." When it was time to leave, Lily clung to him again. "Will you come back?" she asked. "As often as I can," he promised. True to his word, Keanu visited Lily every few days over the following weeks. He brought her books, art supplies, and small gifts that he hoped would help her feel less isolated. More importantly, he brought news of her grandmother's progress and carried messages between them. Mrs. Chen was improving steadily, but her recovery was slow. The doctors were optimistic about her long-term prognosis, but they wanted to ensure her blood sugar was completely stabilized before she was discharged. Meanwhile, the social workers continued their search for family members or other potential guardians, coming up empty at every turn. It was during his fourth visit with Lily that Keanu made a decision that would change both their lives forever. They were sitting in Mrs. Patterson's living room, working on a jigsaw puzzle together, when Lily looked up at him with those bright, trusting eyes and said, "I wish you could be my daddy." The words hit Keanu like a physical blow, not because they were unwelcome, but because they articulated something he had been feeling but hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. Over the past few weeks, his concern for Lily had evolved into something deeper, more paternal. He found himself thinking about her constantly, worrying about her future, wanting to protect her from any more pain or loss. "Lily," he said carefully, "what would you think if I talked to the social workers about maybe becoming your guardian? If something happened and your grandmother couldn't take care of you anymore, would you want to live with me?" Lily's face lit up with the same joy she had shown from her window each morning. "Really? You would want me to live with you?" "I would be honored," Keanu said, and meant it completely. The legal process was complex, requiring background checks, home studies, interviews, and mountains of paperwork. Keanu's celebrity status brought both advantages and complications. While his financial stability and public persona worked in his favor, there were concerns about the impact of media attention on a child who had already experienced significant trauma. Throughout it all, Mrs. Chen was a source of unexpected support. When she was finally well enough to have a serious conversation about Lily's future, she surprised everyone by immediately endorsing Keanu's guardianship petition. "I've watched him with her," she told the social workers. "I've seen how he looks at her, how she responds to him. That little girl has lost too much already, but she's found something special with him. Who am I to stand in the way of that?" The arrangement they worked out was unconventional but perfect for their unique situation. Mrs. Chen would move into the guest house on Keanu's property, allowing her to remain a daily presence in Lily's life, while ensuring she had support for her ongoing health needs. Lily would have both her beloved grandmother and a father figure who was committed to giving her the stability and love she deserved. 6 months after that first morning, when Lily hadn't appeared at her window, Keanu stood in a courthouse with his arm around a little girl who now legally bore his last name. Lily Chen Reeves bounced on her toes with excitement as the judge finalized the adoption papers, the same infectious energy that had first caught his attention now directed toward their shared future. "Can I wave from my new window too?" she asked as they left the courthouse. "Every morning if you want," Keanu promised, "though you might not have to wave from so far away anymore." That evening, as they settled into their new routine in Keanu's house in the hills above Los Angeles, Lily curled up next to him on the couch while Mrs. Chen prepared tea in the kitchen. The little girl looked up at him with those bright, trusting eyes and said, "Thank you for seeing me." Keanu hugged her close, thinking about the mysterious instincts that had led him to investigate when she didn't appear at her window, the chain of events that had brought them together, and the family they had built from the most unlikely circumstances. "Thank you for waving," he replied. Outside, Los Angeles sparkled in the gathering dusk, a city of millions of stories intersecting in ways both profound and mundane. Somewhere out there, other children pressed their faces to windows, other adults walked past without noticing, other moments of connection waited to be discovered by those wise enough to pay attention. But inside this house, a man who had spent his career bringing fictional stories to life had discovered that the most meaningful story of all was the one he was now living, a story that began with a simple wave and grew into something that would define the rest of his days. And every morning, as the sun rose over the Santa Monica Mountains, Lily would still wave from her window, not to a stranger passing by, but to the man who had seen her when she needed to be seen, who had cared enough to check when something felt wrong, and who had shown her that sometimes the most extraordinary families are built not from blood, but from the choice to love someone who needs it most. The intersection of Melrose and Fairfax still saw its daily parade of commuters and coffee seekers, but the second-floor window of the old brick apartment building stood empty now, its curtains drawn. Maria at the coffee shop had heard the story from other neighbors, and she would smile whenever she saw Keanu come in with a little girl who looked at him like he hung the moon. "Your daughter is beautiful," she would say, and Keanu would beam with pride that never grew old. Because that's what Lily had become, not through birth or traditional adoption processes, but through the simple recognition that love doesn't always announce itself with grand gestures. Sometimes it begins with a wave, grows through consistency, and solidifies in moments of crisis when one person's instinct to care becomes another person's salvation. In a world often focused on dramatic narratives and extraordinary circumstances, their story was a reminder that the most profound connections often begin with the smallest gestures: a child's wave, an adult's attention, and the courage to act when something doesn't feel right. Years later, when reporters would ask Keanu about the most important role he had ever played, he would always give the same answer: father to Lily. And somewhere in the background, a young woman who had grown up feeling seen and valued would wave at the camera with the same infectious joy that had started it all. Proof that sometimes the best stories are the ones that begin when someone simply cares enough to check on a friend.